Hello, hello. I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry with Nonprofit Connect. The nonprofit industry has seen a tremendous amount of growth over the past 10 years, and unfortunately, this growth has also came with an increased prevalence of tension, issues many times driven by job burnout. We were greatly impacted by the COVID pandemic, facing long hours and increased ambiguity and stress. So today we'll be discussing burnout and talking about why it exists, how to combat it. So let's talk about it. So let's first start with what is burnout? So according to the American Psychological Association, they have a dictionary of psychology and they define burnout as an emotional, physical, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and a negative attitude towards oneself and others. So one of the things to think about with burnout is that burnout is different than, and doesn't have to be tied to depression. And I wanted to define kind of what the difference is between burnout and depression, because they're similar, but it's important to understand that they are different. So with something like depression, a lot of people might think, I'm going through depression, but it might be burnout symptoms. They mirror each other in a way. And so in contrast to depression, burnout is typically a response to a specific environment or situation. So let's say more working hours, let's say dealing with a specific work project that becomes overly stressful and provides, it drains your psychological resources. That's what is typically associated with burnout. Another thing to think about is burnout also goes away. So with detachment, burnout tends to dissipate once one is out of that environment, and depression is not the same. With that detachment, depression doesn't necessarily leave like that and dissipate. And so those are some of the major differences between the two to take a look at and to think about as we're kind of trying to classify what burnout is. So focusing in on counteracting burnout, it's important to understand that burnout needs to be looked at and counteracted at both the individual level and at the systemic level, because at the end of the day, burnout hinders organizational progress, and individuals need to buffer. And then also organizations need to set up systems so that we can counteract burnout as it relates to how work tasks are created and how work is actually performed in the site. So the first piece of information or advice to treat burnout is basically think about counteracting burnout as a work task in itself. And what that means is we want to set up our work day, we want to set up our meetings, our performance management in a way where we can kind of ascertain and capture red flags of burnout before they even occur. And so that could look like in our performance appraisal, creating space for wellness, creating space for having conversation about mental health and about self-care and how it relates to role success. You want to create those things and make it as important as somebody else's professional development, and you can call that personal development. And so it's important to look at burnout as a work task to be able to buffer as it relates to performance. The next piece to think about is mindfulness. So mindfulness is the ability and the notion to be emotionally present as much as possible. And many people do that through meditation, through deep breathing. The question here is, how can mindfulness be shamelessly discussed in the work environment so that's the norm? And so that could look like we're getting our leadership through training on mindfulness. We are putting in, again, we could put in your performance appraisals related to some of the core competencies that associate with mindfulness. And a lot of organizations have started to do this that I've worked with, because what they'll do things like the individuals who are mindful have less conflict, have increased innovation, have more employees speaking up and feeling like they're part of the decision making. And so you tend to see some positive outcomes as it relates to centering mindfulness in how you do your work. We just have to destigmatize mindfulness, that it's not just some, meditation or deep breathing for the sake of deep breathing and kumbaya. More so, this is for us to be mentally resilient. This is built for us to be, present in the moment, to be able to think about, what's going on before things happen and not just fly by them, because some people are all on autopilot, right? So it prevents that. One thing to think about at the individual level is solidifying your centering activities. And so centering activities are basically activities in which one engages in to decrease stress. And so that could be exercise, that could be, it could be meditation, like we talked about earlier. It could be any kind of activity that you do to de-stress. A lot of people go on walks. A lot of people play a sport. A lot of people do things that are basically not related to work and not related to caretaker roles that we have. It could be engaging in art. It can be all kinds of things. But solidifying what your centering activities are very important. They keep you grounded. One of the best advice I'll give you is do this before you actually get into the stressors. So you want to solidify your centering activities before you're actually going through the stress itself, because otherwise it's not really going to be working. It's going to be a Band-Aid fix. So those are some things at the individual level as we think about counteracting burnout, what one can do. So let's transition to systemic or organizational activities or an initiative. So in 2021, Nonprofit HR released the Nonprofit Talent Retention Practices Survey. And it had some very compelling data, and it comprised of about 500 nonprofits. And the report was that 70% of organizations expect turnover rates to increase or stay the same. And one of the things to think about here is the survey also reported that 80% of nonprofit organizations surveyed had no formal staff retention strategy. And so systemically, as we look to counteract burnout, one of the things to think about is, let's set up this nonprofit, in the nonprofit industry, let's set up our retention strategy. It's important to think about what that looks like. And so a retention strategy to counteract burnout can contain things like, what is our process for regular stay surveying? And what that could look like is regular conversation with our staff. And you want to do that both at the macro level, so from HR, and then have regular conversations from supervisor to employee, maybe on a quarterly basis formally. And this could look like gathering ideas from staff. This could look like checking in on self-care. This could look like having career conversations and professional development conversations with your staff. But whatever those cadence, whatever your cadence is, just having components in there where naturally in that cadence, employees are centered. So we are looking at, gathering ideas from them, like I said, and what that's going to do is show that we do care about the ideas. It's just sometimes organizations are super busy and we're go, go, go. We don't take a lot of time for reflection, a lot of time for pausing and strategizing. Well, in these interviews, what you could do from a retention standpoint is, show employees that you do care. You make time for them. And so if you formalize that and make that part of your system of communication, it would be a regular occurrence for employees. So employees would say, you know what, my organization regularly asks me for my ideas, talk about my career growth, checking in with me on a self-care standpoint. Having that part of some kind of system would be part of that retention strategy. 2, we would look at with the results of those conversations, how can we create systems where employees can get more opportunity to grow and enroll and to engage in their self-care activities. So it might be we create opportunity for no meeting Mondays, no meeting Fridays, or we create opportunities where we close the office early in the summer, and just other temporal things like that. Those are like the most basic ideas. Some organizations have also done 4-day work weeks. Some organizations have also done, they'll work 8 straight days. There's all kind of configurations you could do as it relates to the time, and that's important. And lastly, the most important piece that organizations can look at related to counteracting burnout is looking at the workload and counteracting the nature of overwork. And that takes courage. Because what that means is organizations and leaders in organizations need to look at the work and say, you know what, how can we focus on quality over quantity? And actually asking staff to assist with that task, because the staff typically are on the ground and knows what maybe is redundant and knows maybe what can be done a little differently. And so how can we engage in participative leadership and decrease the quantity of work? Because the elephant in the room is people are overworked because they're overworked. They have a lot of things on the plate. And so at the end of the day, something has got to give. And so when we talk about what needs to happen in this retention strategy, doing a capacity analysis for every employee and looking at every role and looking at the amount of work everyone does around the system is important, because we need to eliminate redundancies and we need to focus on quality over quantity. And really, that's the answer as it relates to how do we counteract burnout, because everything else I've said, I've used terms like buffering. I've used terms like supporting and things like that. Those are things that are going to support you. But to really counteract and get to the root cause, we have to look at the nature of overwork. So I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry, and you just heard us talk about it. So thank you. Take care.